Greetings and welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that you've all joined us today, and we have a really great group, a diverse group that's joining us from 49 states and the District of Columbia. We're so pleased that you're connecting with us for this important conversation about education data systems. This is the latest installment of our 2024 Partnering for Success webinar series. I'm Klaus von Zastro, Senior Director of Policy at Education Commission of the States, and I'm delighted to be with all of you here today. Now, if you're joining us for the first time, Partnering for Success is designed to provide you with opportunities to connect with peers, with researchers, and other innovators who are providing solutions to some of today's most pressing education policy issues. And so we hope you leave these webinars filled with insights, with inspiration and with resources that can support you as you address similar challenges in your own states. Now, before I get to our moderator and our panelists, I'm excited to introduce ECS's relatively new president, Jose Munoz. Jose joined our team in January, and he hit the ground running. I know that a good number of ECS commissioners and partners and funders who are in our audience today have already met him, so he's really been making the rounds. So I'm very pleased now to welcome Jose, who has a few remarks before we get to our panel. So I'll pass it to you, Jose.
Thanks, Klaus. And hi, everybody. I'm excited to be part of today's conversation. And actually a conversation led by our partner, SAS. So just so you know, ECS is committed and very grateful to work with esteemed partners such as SAS and to enhance education for everyone. Our work with elected and appointed state education leaders is focused on making better informed policy. So today's conversation is an exciting opportunity to feature how each of us and the experts joining us meet that goal. So thank you, SAS, for collaborating with us on this important topic. So not only will we delve into the dynamic world of statewide longitudinal data systems and their pivotal role in enhancing education through cross-agency collaboration, we are also privileged to be joined by esteemed leaders from Maryland and North Carolina who will share their insights and experiences in leveraging statewide longitudinal data systems to drive positive change in education. In our rapidly evolving educational landscape, data has become more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's a powerful tool that guides decision-making and fosters collaboration and signifies life change. There's a name to the data behind there. So state longitudinal data systems have been instrumental in revolutionizing how we collect and analyze and utilize data to inform policy and practice. Both SAS and our speakers today represent states at the forefront of this movement, working tirelessly to break down silos among agencies and share data and resources in order to better serve students and families. Their commitment to collaboration and innovation has not only strengthened their respective data systems, but has also paved the way for meaningful improvements in education. So thank you so much for joining us. Klaus, I'll hand it back to you to make our first introduction. And thank you, everybody else.
Thanks so much, Jose. Now, it's my pleasure now to introduce today's moderator, Katrina Miller, who is the Director of Educational Partnerships for SAS, and whose expertise in K-12 and higher education policy has been really instrumental in supporting SAS in the educational community. Katrina's background includes degrees in communication and higher education administration, and she's had pivotal roles at the Council of Chief State School Officers and the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. She's been at the forefront of states' efforts to use data for enhancing teacher and leader preparation and for ensuring that equitable education is available to all students, including those with disabilities. So let's extend a very warm welcome to Katrina, who will introduce today's panelists. So I'm handing it to you, Katrina.
Thank you, Klaus. And thank you, ECS, for working with us on this. We're always excited to work with our partners at the Education Commission of the States and two great states, Maryland and North Carolina. We've had an opportunity to work with many of the states represented today on this webinar in developing state longitudinal data systems or other similar work around really bringing data and leveraging it to improve student learning. A lot of SLDS conversations we were a part of, and we're about to get very technical and very wonky into the depths of the technology that is going to be used and infrastructure being developed. And that's not what today's about. today is really to understand how you go about creating the infrastructure with the right people and the places across different state agencies to bring all of this data to bear for policymakers to use it, such as yourself, to really understand how our education systems are operating, and then how to next steps improve student learning and reflect on the things that we've implemented. We're 3 or 4 years now post-COVID, depending on how you want to measure when COVID started and began or ended, or if it did end. And data is more important than ever to make sure that we're continuing to accelerate student learning and that we're providing all of the needs and resources that students have so that we can help them be successful in their careers. And data and technology in those infrastructures are really the backbone of teaching and learning being successful. So I'm excited today to be joined by 2 individuals who are in different places within their states in implementing SLDS systems. One is Ross Goldstein. He's the Executive Director of the Maryland Longitudinal Data Systems Center, and he's its first director. And really, he's been tasked with founding the new state agency, developing the system, and the ongoing work in ensuring that the center is fulfilling its mission to provide timely and accurate information about student performance so that Maryland can improve the education system. Ross has spent his career in public service. He's been a staff attorney in the Florida legislature and the Maryland General Assembly, and also worked for the Maryland State Board of Elections. So he provides a wealth of background and information to this work across different types of agencies, but really focused on improving the education system in Maryland now. I'm also joined by Tripp Stallings from the Executive Director of the North Carolina Longitudinal Data Service. And North Carolina is where our headquarters are, our SAS headquarters. So we're always excited to partner with them and the great work that they're doing there. And the SLDS in North Carolina sits within the Department of Information Technology. In Tripp's role, he is really looking at leadership in building this new system and making sure that it's operational. And he comes from a background of education and policy. Not only is he a former teacher, but he worked for many years, more than a decade, at the Friday Institute for Educational Innovation at North Carolina State University, where he led the research and evaluation team. So we have 2 individuals who have served in state government in a variety of ways, but really are working on the forefront of developing SLDS in 2 states that are in different places with their implementation. So we hope that today's conversation will really allow you to see the spectrum of implementation and to provide you some information on lessons learned on where these 2 gentlemen are. So Ross and Tripp, I'm excited to have you join me today. Thank you so much for spending the time with us, and we're excited to learn from you. First of all, I'd like to start out with Ross. I'll send it to you since you popped up first on camera, and I'll ask you the first question. How did your system come to be, and who made it happen? Where did it start?
Great, thank you. Thank you guys for having me. I'm looking forward to this opportunity. So in Maryland, really was the result of legislation which was passed in 2010. That legislation was a result of really some key champions in the state. The governor was very interested in this, as were several key legislators. I think the state also at that time was able to take advantage of the Race to the Top funding and an SLDS grant. But I think generally there was just a recognition, I think, in the state of the importance of data for governance and government decision making. And I think in particular, the governor at the time was Governor O'Malley, who really considered himself a data user and a data champion. And I think he was, very motivated to see that Maryland didn't have this set up and really really made it a key priority towards the end of his administration to get the longitudinal data legislation passed and then the system up and running.
Thank you. And I'll share with the audience, Maryland is seen as a leader in SLDS. And I've said this to Ross twice now in different settings, and he's always like, we have a lot of work to do. And I think that's always the key. There's always a lot of work to do on this, but I think it'll be interesting to learn from you. Tripp, I want to go to you now and hear the same question. How did your SLDS come to be, and who made it happen? And kind of tell us where you are at this point.
Well, I think the interesting thing about the North Carolina approach to this iteration of its longitudinal data service is that there were so many pre-existing LDSs, including the one managed by our Department of Public Instruction, which is the SLDS recognized by USED. one that exists at our Department of Health and Human Services for early childhood information, one that is a part of an LDS that's managed at our Department of Commerce. So rather than starting from scratch, the arrow was pointing a different way in North Carolina, and then the desire was to create an opportunity to form a crossroads where a lot of those existing, in some cases existing for decades, LDSs could come together and coordinate better. And so our legislature first put that into statute in 2012. And we've been building towards it ever since. I didn't come on board until 2022. That's the first time we named an executive director for the NC-LDS. But since that time, we've been working with all of those existing LDSs that contribute to NC-LDS to create a mutually agreed upon approach to cross-LDS collaboration. Let me see how many acronyms I can squeeze in there.
There are quite a few, and in education especially, we love our acronyms. So I'm going to lean in a little bit more, Trip, with you on that, because you talked about a lot of different agencies. And in all of our states, we have huge data systems and pretty massive longitudinal data systems within individual agencies. So knowing that, and knowing that people are very protective over what they own, can you tell us a little bit more about the mechanisms and strategies that you've used to ensure effective collaboration among the participating agencies within your service?
Yeah, it took a little while for me to figure it out. The advantage I had coming in was that I wasn't new to the state, and I wasn't new to the agencies, and I wasn't new to most of the folks involved. So I had a little bit of a head start by knowing almost all of the people who would be a part of the process, as well as their agencies. So that helped considerably. But it took a little while up front to understand and to unpack where each of the different current LDS administrators and owners was coming from, what their needs were, how they were similar, how they were different. So just giving myself the space to construct those narratives, first with each of the existing LDSs separately, and then bringing them together through the formal process of our executive order required board and committees, but informally too, by bringing them together in smaller settings. One big change we made that for most people will seem like it's just an afterthought was, and you see it in the title here, is changing the terminology from North Carolina Longitudinal Data System to service. And that may seem like a very small or nominal change, but it really reflects the overall philosophy we're trying to push, that NCLDS is not trying to compete or remove or replace existing systems, but instead is trying to create, again, that crossroads space where all of them can come together and we can work out mutually and collectively some of the conflicts or differences that we might have for systems that have grown up separately in different silos up to this point. It's been a significant change to have that mindset and for folks to start buying into that notion of the service instead of the system.
Ross, can you share a little bit with us about Maryland and how you're bridging those gaps among the agencies and making sure everyone's kind of playing well together in the same sandbox?
Sure. So in Maryland, by state statute, the MLDS Center is an independent unit of government, but it's very much a shared governance model. And so at the very top, I report to a governing board, and that governing board is made up of key stakeholders. And so each of the agency heads that provide data to the center sit on our bylaw members of the governing board. And so that includes the superintendent of schools, the secretary of labor, the higher education commission director, the Department of Human Services, and because we have child welfare data in the Department of Juvenile Services, they also provide data in and around the system. In addition, one of the independent colleges association, the president of MICUA is on our board, the president of Morgan State University, and then the executive director of the Maryland Association of Community Colleges, and also the chancellor of the university system. And then there's some other at-large appointments that have to include a healthcare commissioner, because we have healthcare commission data, an expert in large data systems and security, a local representative of the local school superintendents, and then the 3 additional at-large members. So it's a huge board. It's 15 members, but it does ensure a lot of different voices and a lot of different interests are represented and have oversight over the operation of and governance of the agency. In addition to the governing board, we hold monthly advisory board meetings. And so we have a policy advisory board and a data governance advisory board. And those two entities, are there as a sounding board on different issues. They provide, review data policies and standards, and the research and policy board reviews new projects that are starting and has a say in all governance type of matters. And so it's very much a collaborative model, and we really do try to keep those dialogues going. And then the final, I think, way that we make sure that, that there's a lot of collaboration and input from our partners and key stakeholders is I have 3 liaison positions on my staff. And so there's a liaison with the Department of Labor, one with the State Department of Education, and one with the Higher Education Commission. And each of them have fulfill an important role in the agency. So it really solidifies the ongoing, cooperation and collaboration. And it's those 3 agencies, because those were the original 3 agencies. I haven't been able to get new positions for liaisons since that time, but those are the 3 primary agencies. And so it's been very helpful having those liaison positions.
Yeah, at SAS, we do a lot of data governance work. We actually have a whole team that just works with people on data governance. And we always talk about people, process, and technology. And people is first for a reason. I'm really glad that you brought that up. When in the governance structure, you have to have those relationships and make sure you're bringing the right people in. Speaking of people, oftentimes we have a variety of audiences and different focus on each of those audience. They may need different things. Can you tell us a little bit more, and Ross, we'll start with you, about the audiences that you serve in your SLDS and how you ensure you're meeting their needs, because they may have vastly different needs and also depth of knowledge as well.
Right. So in terms of audience, I mean, I think it really is like we've remained very focused on state policymakers, both, in the legislature, the governor's office, but also the people in the agencies who are, really need data to help them make decisions and inform programs. And so I think that's oftentimes really the primary focus. Also, the colleges are, have really come to us and have relied on information that we provided them for various reporting requirements to understand outcomes of their graduates and different issues like that. In terms of, sort of a process involved in it, we do have a research agenda that has broad categories of inquiry and direction for the agency, and that research agenda is set by our governing board. And then we also do an annual output priorities. And so again, that's a document that we present both to our research and policy advisory board and to the governing board. So we're getting a lot of input about where the agency should be focusing its attention on the year and making sure people understand what we're working on and there's no surprises or anything like that. So that's been a helpful process. And then finally, I'd say, we do try to benchmark our output. And so we do and we're required to do this by state government, but we track different results that we have throughout the year. So the number of requests from policymakers, the number of web hits, or number of presentations provided, and all these things, just trying to sort of track and be accountable for what we're doing and making sure that the system is being used and that people are interested in it, and we're doing the types of things necessary to make sure. It's one thing to have a data system, it's something else for people to actually use the data system. And so we try to have some measures out there to see, like, are people really using the system and how effectively are we making it available to them?
And Trip, I'll go back to your conversation earlier about, the nomenclature of it being a service instead of a system, that you're really providing a service. So tell us a little bit more about the audience that you serve and how you're meeting their different needs.
Well, it's to be determined. So this is a good opportunity to note that NCLDS just opened its doors for its soft open test phase just a couple of weeks ago. So we will learn across this year and into next year who our audiences ultimately end up being. With that said, though, we are trying to target, again, with that notion of being a service in mind, we're trying to target different products and different portals for a wide variety of users. My staff and colleagues are probably tired of me hearing me say it all the time, but whenever we have documentation, I often say I'd like a version of this that my mother can understand. And I mean it, because I want everything we do to be as transparent and as digestible as it can be, while at the same time having a backbone of the more serious technology focused or policy focused language we need to, or the legally focused language you need to have. We should have 2 iterations of everything. So the first day, it literally was the first day of when I took the job in 2022, and I started meeting, like I mentioned, with each of our contributors individually. More than one of them said to me, this is not going to work if all we do is build a system that researchers and evaluators access. We need to make sure that, and this is again sort of the birth of the idea of the service rather than system, we need to make sure that we are actively creating tools and products that are usable by our practitioners in the field at all levels. And I have taken that to the next level and said, beyond that, we need to make sure that we have publicly usable data products, products that are easily digestible for different members of different parts of our government, as well as our agencies, like Ross was mentioning. But the proof will be in the pudding. We have to see, once we get a lot of those things stood up, how many of them turn out to be useful, how many of them we need to evolve, how many of them we need to add that we haven't thought about yet. But for right now, we've got 4 different types of products that we'll put out there to try to touch on those 4 different types of audiences.
Sorry, I had a little bit of trouble getting off mute there. I love that. I was recently with one of the clients that we work with, and we build one of their public data portals, and they were with the legislator, and the legislator was like, well, I want to know this about the education system. And they're like, well, it's on our state report card. And they brought it up and showed it. And he was like, well, what about this question? And she was immediately able to click through and show that. And so providing that information, then also making sure people know that it's accessible. And to Ross's point, using it is really important. And like you said, the proof is in the pudding. Are people going out and accessing it? And is it user friendly enough to where a layperson or your mother can understand what they're doing? So that's great. I think one of the things a lot of this audience is probably wondering about, and because they're facing their own, is the obstacles that both of you faced in putting this together, and the challenges, especially around the cross-agency collaboration that seems to kind of be a sticking point for many agencies, and making sure that you can share that data, and people, there's not too many fiefdoms where data sits in one place and can't be shared across agencies, even within the same state. So how did you all face those challenges, and what are you doing to address them?
I started by learning a number of foreign languages. I've been working on a number of privacy issues this year. My friends and colleagues at Wested said that I'm now able to speak FERPish, which I think is how you talk about FERPA. Part of it is becoming savvy and understanding all of those different. I have to go back to my teaching roots. It's the To Kill a Mockingbird moment. It's being able to walk a mile in each of our contributors' shoes, our data owners' shoes, and understanding not only what they need, but also what their concerns are, and why they may be struggling to find ways to communicate with each other. It's not because they don't want to, it's because they're coming from different positions and for different goals. So we spend a lot of time listening, creating spaces for them to talk to each other. I was doing a count the other day of how many formal meetings I think my team and I host just across our agencies, and it's in the 60s or 70s every year. And if you do the math, that's like essentially a meeting every 3rd day that involves somebody from one of the data agencies. So creating a lot of spaces for them to come together, for me to try to stand in the middle and listen and do the translation across each of them to help them understand each other's needs and conflicts, and for me to do the same thing as well. That's how we get started. I think it's just doing a lot of listening and a lot of intentional communication and intentional establishment of spaces in which we're going to ask them the questions we need them to wrestle with.
And Ross, what about you? What is your biggest challenge, and how are you addressing it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think much of what Tripp said really resonates, but I guess for what I would add is, for us, it's process and people. So by process, I mean, we have and it's developed over time, but a very detailed project and project approval and management procedures. And so how projects are brought to us and how we review them. It's very formalized now, and calls for a lot of input from stakeholders. And I think that's helped a lot in terms of, making sure everybody's understands what's coming, has an opportunity to be heard, maybe make suggestions about the research to, or whatever the project is, to either add to it to make it, a lot of times make it better, or just, maybe there's some language that's being used that's objectionable to a stakeholder that we can often, smooth out and things like that. And then on the people side, especially with the agencies, what I found is it's a lot of it is finding that person at an agency, or who I think is a data user and understands and appreciates that giving up their data into the system can also be not just a loss of control, but also can be a benefit for them. They can ask questions of the system. They see the value to it, and for us, we've had several people in our partner agencies who have really kind of championed the system because they saw its value and saw that they can really utilize it for the work that they were doing. And I think that's really been a huge help in moving things forward.
Katrina, can I follow up on that just a little bit? Because thanks to Ross for helping jog some thoughts in my own head. Do you mind? I think one of the points he brings up is this idea of the sensitivity about data ownership and what's happening with my data. And that's we intentionally made the decision early on that in no way would NCLDS ever try to own any of the data. So even though the agency where I live, DIT, is the warehousing host for some of the state agency data, NCLDS treats it like all other data as if it were external, and nothing happens to it without the explicit permission and approval of the data owner. And in some cases, that means that it takes a little bit longer to do things, but it also means that we are upfront seeking actively buy-in and support for whatever is asked of the data of these agencies. Similarly, none of our governance rules or quality procedures, none of them has been established without unanimous input from our 6 current contributors. And so there are a lot of rules and governance and policies that we put in place over the last 2 years. And again, it takes a lot of time to get that kind of consensus, but it is well worth it in the end. I think the challenge for us there, it's not all sunshine and roses, is as we start to expand and introduce new contributors to LDS, we'll have to once again revisit how to introduce a new party into that process that wasn't a part of that intentional collegial building of policies, procedures, and rules.
Ross, I want to ask you a follow-up question. It's not on our prep document, so be prepared. Based on what Tripp just brought up, and he said, they started with these 6 and it was a very collegial process, and then they're going to bring on more. Have you had the opportunity to do that in Maryland? I know you're a little bit farther down the road where you kind of set things out and you brought more agencies on since those, and how did that process work, and kind of what challenges did you see there, and how did you overcome them?
Sure. Yeah, so originally we started with just the 3 partner agencies, the Department of Labor, Higher Education, and the State Department of Education. And since that time, we've added child welfare, so from the Department of Human Services, and juvenile services data from our Department of Juvenile Services. And in both cases, it required a change in law, because at the time when the center was established, state law specifically said that those were not acceptable student data to include in the system. But in both of those cases, I think it was really those agencies that came to the table wanting to participate. They saw value. I think, for example, the juvenile services director at the time said, the only measure that we have is negative measure of recidivism, and whether or not kids who have been through the system wind up back in the system, juvenile justice system. They wanted to be able to look at some positive outcomes, high school, returning to high school, graduating, going to college. And so they saw this as an opportunity to join in. So I think the pathway was pretty easy in that respect, because it was voluntary. They really asked to be included.
That's such a powerful example to be able to say, yes, these kids have touched this juvenile justice system, but look at the success we're seeing now. I love that they came to you and wanted that. So that's wonderful. So let's take challenges to think about like next steps, what's coming next. There's a lot changing. We hear a lot about AI, which, people are thinking about large language models like ChatGPT, but we know AI is much greater than that, with a lot of deep machine learning that we can do and neural networks to learn more about the data and even make predictions, have synthetic data. What do you see coming? How do you think it's going to impact SLDS in particular? And what do you think that leaders need to do to make sure that their data systems in particular are prepared for that, and also the policy around it is prepared for it?
I am so blessed to be located in the state's Department of Information Technology for this very reason. I am not alone in having to think about AI. In fact, the director of the data division where I live, she is taking point on helping our Department of Information Technology and our state think about how we're going to approach the challenges of AI, but also take advantage of the opportunities, in particular for LDS. And I had this realization the other day when she and I were talking. There's an incredible opportunity that only data geeks are going to really care about, I think. And it's got nothing to do with what the AI itself will do when it's applied to the data. It's the fact that the presence or the growing awareness of AI gives us a great opportunity to share with our data owners a new reason why it is so important for us to think and rethink about the quality of the data that are out there. So we always are always going to have more data available than time and opportunity to clean it or to make it as accurate as we can, because there are thousands of data entry folks in our state entering thousands upon thousands of pieces of data every day. But AI is one of the new concepts or leverage tools we can use to say, this is why it matters for us to start thinking systematically again about how we can do a better job of being better stewards of our data. So that may seem like a really low level, not particularly exciting, and I'll put it in air quotes, use of AI, but the existence and the growth of AI really opens the door for those serious conversations about improving the overall quality of the data that we make available.
So, Trip, I have a phrase for you. It's belts and suspenders. So that's what I call that. I'm in a ton of conversations around AI, and everyone's like, "Oh, let's apply AI to this and AI to that." And I'm like, well, first we have to make sure we got our belts and suspenders, and that the data is accurate, data input clean, and that the data that we're using is right. Because if you're just applying AI to bad data, you're just getting bad results. It's the same with any kind of modeling that you're doing. So I'm often talking to policymakers about that, especially because it's exciting and there's a huge opportunity there. But you're right, the biggest opportunity is to make sure that we're addressing those underlying infrastructures there.
Well, and you already mentioned some of the things that I know everybody on this call is aware of that we have to be cautious about. It's the oversell of AI as the panacea, that all I have to do is hit the AI button and all problems are solved. And I'd love for that to be the case. I know it's not, but I also know that there are a lot of things that it can do for us that we're not able to do now, especially when it comes to processing and thinking about in more naturalized ways some of the problems that we might have tried to approach mechanically or that we couldn't approach at all. That matters a lot to me as I put on my research and evaluator hat, because the reason I came into this sphere was not because I wanted to help build an education and workforce focused LDS, but I wanted to build an all data systems LDS. And that means not only having data available and linkable across a number of different resources, but also starting to ask much better and much more elaborate questions. And that right there is something that I look forward to finding ways to have AI serve as a tool to help us do a better job of.
Ross, what are your thoughts on this subject?
Right. Well, first, to sort of pick up on what Trip was just saying, I think that this idea of longitudinal data system for all needs is because, we've started being approached, there's like a healthcare workforce data exchange, which in part, I think we have a lot of the data that we could address a lot of the questions for them in terms of the pipeline of education into profession. But there's also a lot of things that they're interested in that are way outside of education. And so I think I've been trying to think through like, well, where would we fit in? And can we be a resource for all different types of longitudinal data needs? Or is it really just staying focused on education related data. And so I think that's something that's coming down the pike that, there's been different questions about that. And so that's something, and maybe I'll talk to Trip offline about how they coordinate all of that in North Carolina. In terms of AI, I think, we did have a researcher recently who is using machine learning as really more of a methodological inquiry. How well did machine learning perform on education data? Were there any inherent biases and issues like that? And so I really view the AI and its use sort of along those lines. And to me right now, its application to this data and, for education longitudinal data is unknown. It's something that has to be, certainly not turn away from it, but, take some time to really study it and make sure that it's accurate, methodologically sound method for analyzing student data. And so I think it's definitely something that we're open to, but also I think just, as Tripp said, we're not just pushing a button and hoping for the best. I think there's a lot of work that's going to have to go into that.
Well, Ross said something too that I think, I don't know if it was directly in his comment, or if it just triggered something in my head, but it's just a reminder to all of us. We all know that there's no switch that got flipped and suddenly AI exists. We have been using and been taking advantage of all different kinds of AI for a long time. We just haven't necessarily called it that. And we've more, what we've really more done is turn a corner for how many options there are and what kind of speed and depth and thoughtfulness our approaches to AI can take. So we are looking forward to how some of these newer innovations can come into play, but a lot of those things are already in play. As Ross was mentioning, we're already using them. We use some forms of that in the way that we handle tasks like linking across data across different sources.
Yeah, I completely agree, Trip. We are using AI. We're seeing a lot of our clients use AI in a lot of different ways, especially in that data management and data collection, to make sure that we're improving those and making sure the data is much cleaner and better so that we can apply those higher level analytics to it.
What I really appreciate, though, about what North Carolina is doing, I'm sure other states are doing it as well, and I was referencing this earlier, is there's a lot of deliberate thought about how do we understand the potential, how do we understand the challenges, how do we understand the possibilities before we start going whole hog in. So there's some who are champing at the bit, ready to apply some of the new tools and are like, well, open the gate, let me do it. But I think that there's a longer term value in taking this deliberate approach that North Carolina is taking to gather all of the different groups and talk about what we're going to do before we open those kinds of opportunities.
So we're at a point now where we can have audience ask some questions. So if you do have questions, there's a Q&A button at the bottom, and you can post those in the chat, and we'll go through some of those. I'm going to pose one to you now that came through. Is there another state or country that does an education workforce longitudinal data system or service very well that you could point to as a model, or that you have learned from in setting up your state's SLDS?
Yeah, Maryland.
Start here. Go ahead. Sorry. Trip.
Yeah, I said the first one that comes to mind for me is Maryland. So not just because Ross is on, but Maryland's system has been in place a very long time. And we have all of the other states have had a real opportunity to learn as a result of all of the hard work that Maryland has done. You go on their website and you can immediately start to just see when you're poking around, they're at 4th or 5th level details on some stuff that we hope to get to at some point in terms of thinking about how to do this robustly. Some other states I've really leaned on over the last couple of years have been Washington State, Connecticut, Kentucky, Michigan. I'm sure Georgia. I'm sure I'm leaving out some, and I don't mean to. Virginia has some interesting innovations that have helped us out. We've been talking to folks in Indiana and Nebraska about some of the tools they're constructing. I run the risk of not mentioning someone I should, but it's probably 15 or 20 different states I've directly contacted with about some of their innovations and some of their approaches and lessons learned.
Ross, Trip called you out as a leader. So who are you learning from?
Oh, thank you. Well, obviously, I think Kentucky is also certainly another leader in this area. They're doing a lot of good stuff. I've, had the opportunity to learn from them. So I definitely would highlight their work as well.
Some of the things that I think we take away the most, or at least I do, from the states that have a truly evolved approach to this is that there's I don't want to oversimplify it, but there's a two-stemmed approach to how they handle or make the most out of their LDSs. There is the mechanical and data management side, and then there is the policy evaluation research side. And so Ross mentioned Kentucky, for instance, and Kentucky has a very robust policy and research arm that goes hand in hand with its data management. Michigan, same thing in several other states. And that may be a natural evolution. So maybe that's where we all end up anyway, but it's something I've been shooting towards from the start. And I look to those states that have thought about both sides of that coin as a model to shoot for.
Thank you for that. Here's another one. How have you paid for this work? Are you using mostly SLDS grants, or is there a mixture? Both of you are at agencies and executive directors of it. So what does that look like for your state?
Ross, you might have more to say on that. Mine's a very short story. So
Right. Yeah, no, we are primarily state funded. As I said, we
Looks like Ross is frozen. Trip.
oh, good. It's not me.
and there's still every now and then funding through the state budget every year.
Ross, can you repeat that answer? You froze about midway through for the majority of it. Sorry about that.
Oh, no. Right. I'm sorry about that. Am I back? It looks like I'm back. We are a state funded agency. And so we have there's a line item in the budget that funds our agency. That's the primary source. And then there are some, grant funds available at different times. As I said, the beginning, race to the top, and we've had an SLDS grant. Right now we're working with our Department of Labor on a Workforce Data Quality Initiative grant.
So this is, again, I think one of the advantages of having in North Carolina several LDSs. NCLDS has a line item in the budget dedicated just to LDS. DIT provides full-time equivalent employees to help staff our group. But the other LDSs also have their own funding sources. Some of them come through us, but a lot of them are able to benefit from grant. In particular, for instance, our LDS at our Department of Public Instruction, of course, is eligible for USED SLDS grants. And we are starting to look at ways that we can piggyback on some of the research that will be done using the data that we will help to provide to help fund additional expansions of the work that we're doing. So we're at the beginning of figuring out the possibilities, but there's a little less pressure than there might be because so many of our systems that contribute have their own funding streams and their own rich network of support.
Thank you for that. I'm going to lean in on that a little bit with the different systems. So one of the questions here is, you've spoken a lot about different agencies and sources and data that you need to bring together. Has there been any resistance from any of those sources that you've had to overcome, and how did you do it? You talked a little bit earlier about this, but want to lean in a bit more on that.
I think the general concern about whenever we cross sector boundaries is, do these other people understand the federal and state privacy rules that I'm subject to? Do these other people have the same values I do when it comes to making sure that the data will be used in certain ways? And so again, the first step of that is to create the space where they ask those questions. And that wasn't, in our case, I set that up as deliberately as I could. So in my first couple of months, I put together basically a 4-phase strategic plan that would allow me to naturally introduce those questions in an order that I thought made pretty good sense. And so far, so good. Maybe I've judged wrong, but we have been building our way toward both asking and then addressing those questions and then folding in new ones as they come. But a lot of that tension about working across sectors, I think, is less about a desire to participate and more about just a caution about whether or not we can feel confident that everyone comes to the table with the same level of data stewardship standards and responsibilities.
Ross, do you want to address that one?
No, I think Tripp's pretty much covered it, so I'm good.
Okay. Well, we'll lean in. There's a couple of questions around audience here, and about how do you make sure people know about the SLDS? What have you done to encourage awareness and use, and what's worked and hasn't? And then also, how are you making it usable to the general public? And what's your vision for like a high school student or a parent using it? What are the use cases that you have around it?
Yeah, we're in an interesting position because I don't want a lot of people to know about it yet because we haven't opened the doors yet. So I'm mindful of, we've got a space on our website that says this is where you will request data when it's time to do so. But I want to make sure that we're not getting too many early requests. So we do have both a public website and then an internal agency's website for our board meetings to try to get the information out. One of the things I did was I went around the state last year with some of my colleagues from the Office of State Budget Management and from the Department of Public Instruction and from the UNC System Office to start telling some of our potential users at their various conferences and meetings, hey, this thing is coming. A, it's coming, and B, what are some of the things you'd like to see in terms of functionality? So I'm trying to make sure that I'm taking part in conversations where it would make sense for an LDS to play a role. We had a conversation just a couple of days ago set up by our Office of State Budget Management about opportunities for research. Ross was talking about something similar earlier in cross-sector questions that have foster care as their core. And while we don't currently host any foster care data, it's the kind of thing that we can be in a position to help those different data owners prepare for. So we were part of that conversation to say, when you're ready to think about how to do this, we're building a backbone for you that you can use if you want to. To your second question, in terms of what are we doing to try to create ways for our data to be usable by parents or students or other audiences like that. The first product that I hope we can get out the door, and I don't have a timeline for this, but it's what we're calling right now these practitioner portals. The idea that we will have tailor-made or customized access restricted places for practitioners in the field, whether it's a principal at a school or a daycare provider in a daycare network, to be able to access the kinds of data that we're working with in a safe, secure, and aggregated way, if that's the rules that are applied for those data, but not based on questions that we think they should care about, but based on the questions that we were fielding from them. I've got a document where I just continue to add to all of the different things that the folks I meet with in the field, all the practitioners want to see. And it's very long for some of our agency sectors. For others, it's not quite as long yet, but it will grow there, and we will have an embarrassment of riches if we can ever create the portal that will allow for all that to happen. Beyond that, though, one of the other products that any LDS I think tries to make available is privacy and security guarded aggregated data that respond to the kinds of questions that folks have. You can't know what those questions are unless you're asking them to let you know what they want to know. So again, I think that's why a lot of people would assume that the role of an LDS is largely technical or policy driven, but I think a big part of it is interactions with people. And I have been doing some of that as we've been getting our rules in place, but I want to do more of that once we have the tool in place so that we can then learn from those different audiences what kinds of things they'd like for us to build for them.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think that's a great answer in finding, finding people maybe one step away from the public, but, maybe school guidance counselors, for example, or other practitioners like that who can, understand better, because of their proximity to students, what students need to know. I think that might be a good way. I'll be honest. I think this is one area where, despite all the accolades, I don't think we're doing a great job at it yet. We have a lot of information. There's possibly information. I think there's definitely information that could be useful. We have dashboards that show, for every down to the high school level, college, what's the college going rate, graduation rate, workforce outcomes. And so there's a lot of information there that could be, I think, provide guidance or some useful information for the public. But I'm not sure, it's data, it's not necessarily information. And I'm not sure that we've done a great job in turning that into sort of digestible information that, you know, a student and their family or Trip's mother could sit down and really understand easily. As far as, you know, sort of at the policymaker level, you know, I think, again, as Tripp said, it's out there and being in dialogue with folks at, you know, different, you know, meetings of, you know, the community colleges or their affinity groups and working with our, you know, our partners at the Department of Education. So there's lots of opportunities and, you know, for at the policy level to sort of make sure people know that we're here and available to work with them. But I think the public is a tough nut to crack, and I think we're still working at it.
I think we're taking advantage or starting to. It hasn't happened yet, but we're starting to take advantage of the interest in our state and other states in some very clearly defined through lines that cross sectors. So there's a lot of efforts across many states to handle to reach certain attainment goals from secondary to post-secondary to workforce. And in North Carolina, that's through our My Future NC organization. In other states, there's several other states that have similar targets. So we have seen some interest in, like Ross said, there's a lot of dashboards out there. We've got too many dashboards in some ways, but there is growing interest in developing dashboards that have a story behind them. So one of the ones that I know that's been talked about in North Carolina in a number of different iterations, and we'll see which one comes out as the version that we end up doing, that would involve NCLDS in some way, is providing a tool for students and parents to understand the economic and education opportunities in their regions and the different types of job opportunities there and how they might align or where they need to go in order to be successful in a career that makes them the happiest. And so there's a lot of detail work to figure out what those questions are going to be. But the idea of using this enormous amount of data that we know about in terms that can help us understand where there are opportunities for different education opportunities or jobs, and to then turn it into a tool that allows a student or prospective student to say, well, this is a path I care about. Here's a way for me to find that through line in different areas of the state, I think is one of the potential first places where we'll see that happen in a meaningful way beyond just the standard dashboard approach.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that across the states. Texas comes to mind with our oil and gas industry doing a lot of work of making sure they have the right people in the right places to address that.
But what I like about the way that I think I've seen some folks here frame it is it's a lot of times those conversations are about what does the state need. And I think the nice thing about some of the growing conversation I'm hearing is about what does the individual need.
Well, gentlemen, I really appreciate all that you had to say today. We have a lot more questions that we're unable to get to, but I wanted to kind of fly over some of the higher ones that are more broad, but we'll try to follow up with those. I want to turn it over, first of all, say thank you again to Tripp and Ross. You all are doing great work, and we're really excited to learn from you, and we hope it was instructive to the audience. I want to turn it back over to Klaus for a little bit of a closing, and thank you for the audience for participating and joining us today.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you all.
Well, thank you very, very much. It's really been delightful to have everybody here, including the audience. Again, as Katrina said, there were more questions than we could answer, and so we're sorry that we couldn't answer them all, but we do hope that you'll keep us in mind as ECS, that we're here ready to answer questions for you more broadly. We really are going to be a resource for you in your education policy needs. So we're really, really grateful for the questions that you did send. We're very happy that you joined us today. And so before I say anything else, though, I really want to give a huge round of applause for our moderator and our presenters. They made a very, very stimulating conversation. And it's also true that such conversations are what keeps so many of you sticking around to the very last minutes of this webinar. We trust that you're going to be taking away some ideas from today's webinar that your state can draw on. But again, I know there were some unanswered questions in the Q&A. So if you do have questions or requests related to today's session, please do reach out to me. I'm adding my email in the chat so you can do so, and we can make sure that we get them answered or at least explore them or find someone who can. A recording of today's session is going to be shared in your post-event email, so keep your eyes open for that. that. And I did want to give you a little bit of a preview of what's coming. Usually we would actually have another Partnering for Success webinar in July, but of course we have our National Forum on Education Policy at ECS, which takes place July 10th through 12th, which means that we're actually going to be pausing this Partnering for Success until August. So stay tuned for that. But if you do want to attend our national forum in Washington, D.C. from July 10th through 12th, just know that we're close to selling out. You can contact a member of our convene team to ask about possibilities for attending. So with that, we are adjourned. And so I want to thank you all very much again for today and hope that you have a lovely afternoon. Thanks again for joining us, everyone.